There are stories that are written with ink, and there are stories that are written with silence, and Unspoken Script belongs to the latter. Between the flash of studio lights and the hush of the film set, Zhan and Wang Yibo created something that transcended dialogue. Every glance, every pause, every breath between them became its own kind of language, a story without words, yet filled with meaning too deep to explain. It began on a night when the city hummed like a restless symphony. The air was thick with tension and electricity as the cameras rolled. Zhan stood beneath a dim light, his expression unreadable, a canvas of emotions yet to be painted. Across from him, Wang Yibo watched quietly, his eyes reflecting the same storm. The script called for a simple scene, two characters confronting each other after years of silence. But what happened that night was far beyond acting. When Zhan lifted his gaze, something shifted. It wasn't just the character he was portraying, it was something real, something raw. His voice trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from a truth he couldn't disguise. Wang Yibo responded not with words, but with a stare that cut straight through the pretense. The set fell into a quiet so deep that even the crew forgot to breathe. The director didn't call cut. He didn't need to. The silence was the performance. Later, when they reviewed the footage, it was clear. This wasn't scripted. There was an unsaid dialogue happening between them, a communication built on trust, understanding, and an unbreakable connection. "We didn't plan that," Zhan said softly during the post-shoot interview. Wang Yibo just smiled, that rare, almost imperceptible curve of his lips, and said, "We didn't need to." Off camera, Unspoken Script continued to unfold in ways no one expected. The chemistry between them was undeniable, effortless and electric. During rehearsals, they often improvised scenes that weren't even in the script. Sometimes, Zhan would change a line, and Wang Yibo would instinctively respond, adjusting his tone and movement as if they shared one creative mind. The crew called it the invisible rhythm, a silent melody that only the two of them could hear. There was one particular scene that became legendary among the staff. It was set in an abandoned theater, filled with echoes of a forgotten past. The lighting was minimal, just streaks of gold and dust cutting through the darkness. Zhan's character was meant to deliver a confession, but halfway through, the emotion overtook him. His voice cracked. He looked up directly at Wang Yibo, who wasn't even supposed to reply in that moment. But instead of staying still, Wang Yibo stepped forward, gently rested his hand on Zhan's shoulder, and whispered something inaudible. The cameras caught everything, the trembling of Zhan's lip, the tear that escaped before he could stop it, the subtle tightening of Wang Yibo's fingers. That single take became the heart of the film. The director later said, "You can't write that kind of truth. You can only witness it." Behind the scenes, Zhan and Wang Yibo's working dynamic was something extraordinary. They didn't talk much between takes, but when they did, their conversations had depth. Quiet, thoughtful exchanges about character motivations, pain, and purpose. Sometimes they would sit side by side, scripts in hand, not saying a word. And yet there was no awkwardness. Their silence had a rhythm. Their stillness spoke volumes. During one late-night shoot, it began to rain unexpectedly. The production crew scrambled to cover the equipment, but Zhan and Wang Yibo stayed in the rain, continuing their scene. Soaked, trembling, completely immersed, the water ran down their faces, blurring the line between tears and raindrops. The director, instead of stopping them, whispered, "Keep rolling." What followed was one of the most hauntingly beautiful performances ever captured. Two souls drenched in truth, refusing to break the moment. When the scene ended, there was no applause, just quiet awe. What makes Unspoken Script so mesmerizing isn't just the acting, it's the authenticity that radiates from Zhan and Wang Yibo's connection. Their friendship, built on mutual respect and an unspoken understanding, became the very heartbeat of the story. Even in interviews, they would often finish each other's sentences, or simply glance at one another and laugh as if sharing an inside joke no one else could comprehend. At a press event, a reporter once asked, How do you create such believable emotion between you two? Zhan smiled, looked at Wang Yibo and said, "We don't create it. We just let it happen." Wang Yibo nodded quietly and added, "Some stories don't need words. They just need honesty." Their honesty became their trademark. Every movement, every hesitation felt real because it was. When Zhan looked at Wang Yibo on screen, you could see layers of emotion. Admiration, sorrow, comfort, like pages of a storybook written without ink. When Wang Yibo responded, it wasn't with rehearsed precision but with something organic, instinctive. Together they didn't just act, they existed in the moment. The fans noticed too. Online discussions exploded with theories about the hidden meanings behind their scenes. The way Zhan's hand lingered slightly too long when passing an object, or how Wang Yibo's eyes softened in moments that weren't even scripted for emotion. Viewers began calling it the unspoken language, a term that perfectly captured the essence of their performance. One unforgettable moment came during the rap party. As the final scene was played on the big screen, Zhan stood quietly in the back of the room, watching. Wang Yibo, sitting a few seats away, looked over and caught his gaze. No words were exchanged, but a subtle nod passed between them, a gesture filled with gratitude and mutual recognition. They both knew what they had created was something rare. Something that would linger in people's hearts long after the credits rolled. After the shoot, when fans asked if they would work together again, Wang Yibo said, "If the story is right, and if there's silence to fill, yes." Zhan added, "We'll find another script, maybe not written but felt." That line alone sent the fandom into a frenzy, because Unspoken Script wasn't just a project. It was a phenomenon. Every great story leaves an echo, and this one lingers in every quiet moment that follows. When you watch them on screen, it's not about what they say, it's about what they don't say. The tension, the longing, the understanding, all wrapped in the simplest gestures. Perhaps that's the real beauty of Unspoken Script. It reminds us that communication isn't always about dialogue. Sometimes it's about connection. Sometimes the most powerful stories are told in silence, in a shared glance, a breath, a heartbeat. Zhan and Wang Yibo didn't just act in Unspoken Script. They lived it. They turned stillness into poetry, silence into music, and emotion into art. It's not just a film, it's an experience, one that makes you listen, not with your ears but with your soul. So, the next time you find yourself in silence, remember, maybe that's where the real story begins. The cameras had stopped rolling, but the energy between Zhan and Wang Yibo lingered in the air like a pulse, alive, rhythmic, unspoken. It was as if the universe itself had written a scene between them that even the director couldn't have imagined. Unspoken Script wasn't merely being filmed anymore. It was unfolding naturally, moment by moment, every silence between them charged with meaning. That night on set, something extraordinary happened. The crew was tired, and the atmosphere was quiet except for the hum of the overhead lights. The next scene was simple. A conversation between two characters who had drifted apart over time, now standing face to face under a flickering streetlight. The lines were minimal. The script read only, "You came back." Zhan stepped into position, rain misting gently across his face. Wang Yibo stood opposite him, expression unreadable. His eyes locked on Zhan's. The director called, "Action!" But instead of speaking his line immediately, Zhan hesitated. Heartbeat. Breathe. Then he exhaled, a shaky breath that somehow carried a lifetime of emotions. His eyes glimmered not with performance, but with something painfully real. The line slipped out in a whisper, trembling with sincerity. "You came back." Wang Yibo didn't answer with words. He simply stepped forward, closing the space between them, his gaze never leaving Zhan's. It was an unscripted move. The director watched, frozen. The crew dared not blink. The tension was electric. Two souls communicating in a language that no camera could fully capture. Then, without warning, Wang Yibo reached up and brushed away a raindrop. Or was it a tear? From Zhan's cheek. His hand lingered for just a second too long. The scene ended, not with dialogue, but with silence so profound that even the sound of rain seemed muted. When the director finally whispered, "Cut," nobody moved. The assistant cinematographer later said, "It felt like witnessing something sacred." That take was never rehearsed, yet it became one of the most powerful scenes in Unspoken Script. Zhan later admitted, "It didn't feel like acting. It felt like understanding." And Wang, true to his quiet nature, simply nodded and said, "We didn't need lines." Days later, during a late-night rehearsal, another unforgettable moment occurred. The two were practicing an emotional confrontation scene. The script demanded shouting, pain, and chaos, but when they began, everything shifted. Instead of raising his voice, Zhan delivered his anger through trembling restraint. "You don't understand what it cost me," he said, voice cracking but soft, almost broken. Wang Yibo's response wasn't in the script. He didn't argue. He didn't fight back. He just stepped closer until they were barely inches apart and whispered, "I do." The silence that followed carried more weight than 1,000 shouted words. The camera rolled, capturing every flicker of emotion in their eyes. Heartbreak, forgiveness, and something else unspoken. The director was left speechless. "That," he said afterward, "wasn't performance. That was truth." Off-screen, Zhan and Wang Yibo's creative bond deepened. They didn't always talk, but they communicated effortlessly through small gestures. A shared glance, a nod, a subtle grin when something clicked during a take. Their synergy was so natural that even the lighting team began to adjust cues based on their movements rather than the script's timing. One night, after filming wrapped, the crew decided to review the day's footage. The room was filled with soft light, the hum of the projector, and quiet anticipation. As the scene played, the rain, the glance, the touch, everyone in the room fell silent. When the lights came on, Zhan sat still, eyes distant. Wang Yibo looked over, catching that expression, and said softly, "It felt real." Zhan turned to him, smiled faintly, and replied, "Maybe it was." That exchange, brief, spontaneous, and sincere, became the soul of Unspoken Script. It wasn't just about characters anymore. It was about two artists communicating without barriers, trusting the silence between them to speak what words couldn't. The magic continued even in the smallest, unplanned moments. During one shoot, a gust of wind swept across the set, scattering papers everywhere. Most actors would have broken character, but not them. Zhan instinctively reached to catch a falling page, while Wang Yibo knelt to help him gather the rest. Their fingers brushed briefly, their eyes met, and the camera, still rolling by accident, captured that fleeting connection. It was never written in the script, yet it became one of the most beloved visuals in the film. In interviews later, when asked how they achieved such chemistry, Zhan answered with his usual warmth, "Sometimes you just find someone who understands the silence." Wang Yibo, sitting beside him, added quietly, "Sometimes silence says everything." The fans could feel it too. Online forums exploded with analysis and emotion. Viewers replaying scenes frame by frame, dissecting every glance and gesture. "They're not acting," one fan commented. "They're living the story." Another wrote, "Their eyes are the dialogue." As production neared its end, the final scene was filmed at dawn. The rising sun painted the horizon gold as Zhan and Wang Yibo stood side by side, looking toward the light. The script called for one last line, a goodbye. But as the director whispered action, neither of them spoke. Instead, they shared a quiet look, filled with years of untold emotion. The moment stretched, fragile and infinite. And then, without a word, Wang Yibo reached out and clasped Zhan's hand. The camera captured it all, the trembling, the peace, the understanding. It was pure, unscripted, breathtaking. When the director finally said, "Cut," there wasn't applause. There didn't need to be. Everyone knew they had witnessed something special, a moment that couldn't be repeated. Later, as the sun climbed higher and the set began to clear, Zhan turned to Wang Yibo and said softly, "Some scripts are written with words, and some are written with hearts." Wang Yibo looked at him, his expression unreadable but gentle, and replied, "Ours was never written. It was felt." That was the final line. Not in the movie, but in the story of Unspoken Script. Even now, fans rewatch the film not for its plot, but for its emotion. For that invisible current flowing between two people who speak volumes without uttering a single word. Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo transformed silence into poetry, stillness into art, and emotion into eternity. They proved that sometimes, the most powerful connection doesn't come from dialogue or action. It comes from understanding. Comes from trust. It comes from that rare, beautiful thing. The unspoken script. So, dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, if you felt that same spark, that same magic, then don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that capture the untold emotions behind Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo's most unforgettable moments. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps us bring more cinematic magic straight to your screens.